The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. During today's virtual hearing, members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. When you are recognized to speak, if I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. To avoid inadvertent background noise, I or staff I designate may mute participant microphones when they are not recognized to speak. If there is a technology issue during a member's speaking time, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. We will be following the 5-minute rule with 1 minute remaining in your time. The clock on your screen will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red, and it will be time to recognize the next member. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, alternating by party, beginning with the chair and ranking member, and then going to members present at the time the hearing is called to order in order of seniority. We will continue alternating by party until every member present has had a first round. Members can submit information in writing at any of our hearings or markups using the email address provided in advance to your staff. Let us begin. I welcome James Murray, Director of the United States Secret Service, who is here to discuss his agency's operations and the fiscal year 2023 budget request. Director Murray, you are charged with 2 primary missions: protecting the president, key officials, and foreign dignitaries, and investigating threats to our currency and financial systems and infrastructure. While this may not be a presidential transition or campaign year, the Secret Service has a very heavy protective workload, with several national special security events tentatively planned, including the UN General Assembly in New York City. While not an NSSE event, you also have the upcoming Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. In addition, the agency is protecting a comparatively large number of additional protectees beyond the president, vice president, and their families, and the former presidents, including a small number of former officials from prior administration who were assigned protection by the last president and whose protection has been temporarily extended by the current president. I hope you will use this hearing as an opportunity to provide us with a candid assessment of whether your budget request is sufficient to carry out your protection responsibilities. We also want to hear details about your challenges related to cyber fraud investigations and maintaining a workforce hiring pipeline and training capacity aligned with current and future staffing requirements. Also, before I turn to the ranking member, while I understand you are addressing the situation that happened in South Korea this past weekend, I would like you to update the committee. I look forward to our discussion this afternoon. I would now like to turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And as usual, I appreciate this very important hearing for the subcommittee. Look forward to our discussions today. Welcome, Director Murray. I want to thank you for your testimony today, sir, as we discuss the fiscal year 2023 budget request for the Secret Service. It was a pleasure, sir, to speak with you and your outstanding team last week. You came by the office as you often do, and that means a lot to me and my staff and allows these hearings to go much better and keeps me better prepared. So thank you so much for that, sir. I also want to thank you personally for your many years of service to our nation. Not only is your agency charged with protecting the president, vice president, and their families, but you also protect other senior U.S. officials and the former presidents. In addition, national special security events such as the UN General Assembly stretch the Secret Service thin when hundreds of agents are required for the protection of visiting heads of state. It's a tough job with zero margin for error. Unlike in the past, there are serious and credible threats by our adversaries to several high-ranking former administration officials who have been provided protection as a result. This has also increased the demand for agents. Numerous national special security events each year are coupled with increased travel, high-profile political rallies, and an upcoming campaign season. Taken together, this operational landscape presents challenges for the agency, particularly the Uniform Division, who are called upon to work significant overtime during protective details. While not known as well, the Secret Service investigative arm has thwarted fraud and criminal activity throughout the financial sector, particularly the explosion of COVID fraud cases where criminals seek to exploit programs intended to help those Americans in most need. Last year, the Secret Service cyber financial investigations prevented the loss of $2.3 billion. Secret Service counterfeit investigation arrested over 200 criminals, and COVID fraud investigations resulted in 215 arrests and returned over $86 million to victims. Turning to the budget request, the Secret Service proposal includes $2.7 billion to support ongoing protective and investigative operations and investments. This represents an increase of 200 agents, uniformed officers, investigators, and support staff, continued investment in the fully armored vehicle replacement program, and funds to begin the planning and preparation for the 2024 presidential campaign. As with other federal agencies, recruiting and retention issues continue to pose challenges to hiring, especially considering the rigorous background checks, polygraph requirements, and other vetting the Secret Service requires. Mandatory salary caps, especially for more senior agents, reduce the potential for overtime earnings and negatively impact retention, requiring agents to still work overtime while leaving those hard-earned wages on the table. Growing the service to around 10,000 agents should reduce the fiscal impact of the time-intensive nature of the job. At the same time, to provide additional capacity to mature and train the next generation of agents. I look forward to hearing an update on your human capital strategic plan. Again, I thank you for your service to our country, and please convey our deep appreciation for the men and women of the Secret Service. I look forward to your testimony, sir, and Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Director Murray, we will submit the full text of your official statement for the hearing record. Please begin your oral summary, which I would ask you keep to 5 minutes.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Robo-Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your continued support and the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the President's fiscal year 2023 budget for the Secret Service. I'm pleased with the progress presented in this budget and will note that much of this was possible due in large part to the support of your subcommittee provided in fiscal year 22. Before we begin, I did want to express how grateful I am for the resiliency shown by the men and women of the Secret Service. We are only successful in our integrated mission because of our workforce and their dedication to protecting our nation's leaders and safeguarding the American public from cyber criminals. Since last appearing before the subcommittee a year ago, our personnel have carried out 4,900 protective operations, led security planning for 2 national special security events, and as noted, we are currently preparing for the 9th Summit of the Americas slated for Los Angeles next month. In defense of our nation's critical infrastructure and the financial sector, our agents responded to an average of 2 cyber network intrusions and closed an average of 6 cybercrime cases per day. And across our network of 161 field offices, we made almost 1,000 arrests over the past year. This is just a snapshot of the vital work that the talented professionals of the Secret Service perform on a daily basis. As we look forward to the next fiscal year, the President's $2.7 billion budget request provides for continued staffing growth and training of our workforce, lead up funding for the 2024 presidential campaign, and critical investments into our agency's abilities to investigate cybercrime. Our workforce is our most precious resource, and this request includes $42 million for our agency to achieve a staffing objective of 8,305 positions. This continues to move us a step closer to our longer-term human capital target of nearly 10,000 personnel by the year 2027. Robust hiring translates to robust training, and we plan to conduct 17 basic training classes for newly hired special agents and 12 for newly hired uniform division police officers. With our country's emergence from the pandemic, we anticipate a return to fully attended NSSEs such as the UN General Assembly, as well as a very high protective operations tempo moving forward. Along the same line, unforeseeable large-scale events not designated as an NSSE, such as the Summer of the Americas, will require extensive resources and personnel in order to develop and execute effective operational security. As this subcommittee is also aware, fiscal year 23 marks 1 year out from the next presidential campaign, and the budget request provides $34 million to initiate preparations for campaign operations. This funding will be used to begin training our personnel and federal partners, while at the same time permit us the ability to purchase new equipment such as magnetometers, and then pre-position assets and vehicles across the country that will be used in support of the campaign through 2024. In addition to all the physical and technical measures we employ, a key element to our protective methodology is how we manage protective threats. We share this knowledge of threat management through our National Threat Assessment Center, or NTAC. Last year, NTAC conducted 135 training events, engaging with nearly 24,000 participants on techniques related to identifying and mitigating targeted violence. With your support, this important work will continue in fiscal year 23. With respect to our investigative mandate, our agents are highly skilled in investigating transnational organized crime that poses a direct threat to our national and our economic security. Our sustained focus on cyber-enabled crimes has resulted in the prevention of more than $9.5 billion in potential fraud loss over the past several years. In particular, efforts by Congress to help those financially impacted by the pandemic has created the unintended consequence of opportunities for criminals. In the past 2 years, the Secret Service has opened almost 1,000 COVID fraud-related cases. We've seized more than $1 billion in that regard, and more importantly, prevented and returned more than 3 times that amount to some of the most vulnerable Americans. Our agency's focus on cybercrime is led by our cyber fraud task forces. We partner with state and local investigators on these task forces after training and equipping them at our National Computer Forensics Institute, or Ncfi, where since 2008, we've trained almost 18,000 partners hailing from all 50 states. This budget request provides $30 million to continue with this effort. All of this is just a partial summary of some of the outstanding work the Secret Service carries out. Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm grateful for your unwavering support of our integrated mission and our workforce. I will place the remainder of my statement in the official record and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Director Murray, as you noted, your budget proposes an increase of $42.4 million for 200 additional positions based on the Secret Service's FY 21-25 Human Capital Strategic Plan. This would bring your total personnel level to just over 8,100, while the strategic plan calls for continued growth up to 9,595. What hiring and retention challenges does the Secret Service currently face, and how will projected retirements impact the ability to meet future staffing requirements?
Thank you for your question, ma'am. So the Secret Service has been fortunate over the decades to attract very high caliber candidates. The flip side of that is that we have exceedingly high standards when it comes to being considered to be an applicant, and then things like polygraph and being able to achieve certain security clearances. So that's a pretty unique challenge to us. One thing we've incorporated since we spoke last year is we've reintroduced a pre-employment physical fitness test. That's something we'd suspended for a number of years. We think this will help us identify folks who are ready to come on board in our law enforcement positions and not have to onboard them and then possibly separate later on. With regard to the retirement situation, as I discussed with the subcommittee last year, we are in the middle of what we call a retirement bubble. This is because of uneven hiring that would have taken place back in the 90s and the 2000s. We're at the peak of that bubble now. As we move forward and upward with our human capital strategic plan, we expect that will subside and we won't have that same challenge. However, being able to achieve that 95 is pretty reliant on being able to hire somewhere in the area or plus up about 300 people every year. This year, we're right at about 200 for fiscal year 23.
Well, even with increased hiring, the USS still relies extensively on overtime. What is the impact of current staffing levels on overtime demands and morale?
So overtime is a reality here in the Secret Service, always has been. And even when we get to that number of just under 10,000, it will be as well. And that's because we don't get to decide our mission tempo, especially when it comes to our protective mission. That's decided for us by the number of people we protect and the number of operations we have to carry out. The ability to provide overtime and overtime above the standing pay cap has paid off big dividends. And the most notable one is that the folks that come in jeopardy of going over that pay cap are our most experienced people. They're our most senior agents and officers, and they're also our operational supervisors. And these are folks with a substantial amount of time on the job that frankly are very near or at retirement eligibility. Because of this ability to provide them to pay this overtime, we've actually seen an uptick in folks staying on the job and not leaving where they had in the past.
Okay, yet you still have an increasing number of employees who are not fully compensated for their work despite the higher pay gap. What impact does that have on morale and retention of agents and officers who work, this overtime and are not able to be legally compensated?
Yes, ma'am. It is, even though we're able to go beyond the federal employee pay cap, we're able to go just beyond that to a senior executive service level. But once we get there, folks are required to work beyond that, but we cannot compensate them for it. It's a challenge, also a reality here in our job, and one that we're probably not going to be able to ever get relief there. However, as we grow the workforce, we should ameliorate that challenge moving forward.
Okay, and based on your current hiring, when do you expect that you might be able to reach that goal of as you say, 95?
We're currently on, if we're able to hire somewhere around 300 per year, we should achieve it by fiscal year 2027.
One of the ongoing challenges for the Secret Service is how to achieve required training while also keeping pace with increased protective requirements. How is the Secret Service's ability to train its workforce impacted by your increasing protection requirements, and what have you done to address those challenges?
Thanks for your question, ma'am. So as members of the subcommittee are aware, Secret Service has been informed and guided by a panel that was set up in the wake of a fence jumping incident about 8 years ago. It's referred to as PMP, the Protective Mission Panel. There were 19 recommendations made for the Secret Service. We've implemented 17 of them. The 2 that remain outstanding have to do with training and hiring, and those are intrinsically linked. So as we continue to grow the workforce, we're able to increase training opportunities. But I think until we get to that number of about 10,000, we'll never be able to cover down on the actual prime recommendation from the PMP. What we have done, however, and we've learned this collectively as our experience going through the pandemic, is we've learned to do 2 things. We've regionalized training opportunities, where in addition to training people at our facility here in the National Capital Region, we actually send out a team of trainers across the country to not only train Secret Service, but our many public safety and law enforcement partners across the country. And then at the same time, we're doing what we can to maximize virtual training opportunities. The challenge, however, ma'am, is that when you have a mission tempo that requires us to effectively have folks work days off, holidays, and long days, it's not possible in every instance to have those people go in and complete cyclical or in-service training. And that's where the Human Capital Strategic Plan sort of helps us achieve that in the long term.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, thank you, Director Murray. Sir, the Secret Service is seeing increased travel as COVID restrictions are finally lifted. And with larger than normal of protectees coupled with additional events that require advanced teams and details, the result is pressure on both your personnel and financial resources. Director Murray, as I said in my opening statement, the margin of error for the Secret Service protective work is zero. I'd like to know, sir, how does the increase in protective services, travel, and overall mission requirements impact your resourcing needs, sir?
Thank you for the question, sir. So at present, we have about 34 domestic protectees. That's in addition to the very many foreign heads of state, heads of government we provide protection for when they visit our country. Anytime you go from administration to administration, that domestic number will change. It'll even change within an administration. The one thing we don't have the benefit of is when we start a fiscal or a calendar year, as I noted earlier, we can't prescribe how many protective operations or how many visits we're going to cover. That's dictated to us. And candidly, the tempo we're seeing, especially as we come out of COVID, is certainly exceeding even the assumptions we made a number of months ago. We are seeing a higher number of travel, particularly when it comes to overseas travel. In this third quarter alone that we're in, the Secret Service will have carried out in excess of 80 foreign trips for the folks we protect here domestically. At the same time, the nature of travel is very different. As was noted, we have a number of folks in the former administration who are still protectees, but the one thing we're seeing with a former president is we're seeing rallies where we've never seen this before. And it's not the number of visits, because when we look at the former president's number of trips as compared to the three predecessors, President Clinton, President Obama, President Bush, the number of trips are about the same. The nature is different. And we're seeing sometimes 2, 3, 4 of these rallies every month. The challenge is that when one is a sitting president or vice president, he or she receives support from the Department of Defense. What that means is when President Biden or Vice President Harris goes somewhere, the U.S. Air Force supports the Secret Service mission by transporting not only some of our people, but more importantly, our vehicles, our equipment, and other resources. Once somebody's no longer a sitting president or vice president, we don't have that DoD support in that regard. We have to figure out solutions for ourselves. So that has been a challenge, and one we could not have made assumptions about even 6 months ago, sir.
Understood. Thank you, sir. Speaking of campaign, sir, your budget requests $34 million to support preparations for the 2024 presidential campaign. What will this funding support, and what preparations are required as you get ready for the campaign trail?
Yes, sir. So once one campaign ends and we go into a presidential transition and we come out of that, the Secret Service in earnest begins planning for the next campaign. So we've been doing that for the past year or so, but that fiscal year prior to the actual campaign year is critical for us, because that's when we start making firm preparations and we start leading up to our operations. The one thing we do is we start to identify how we're going to staff a campaign. And typically what we do is we identify about 8 different campaign details, which are actually 16. It's a and B rotation, because folks will go out 3 weeks at a time. And then we bring those details in and we deliver them some advanced training here at our training facility within the National Capital Region. At the same time, we're going to be sending those regional training teams I mentioned earlier out to train our field personnel, as well as our federal, state, and local partners. Beyond that, what we'll do with that funding, sir, is we will go ahead and we'll purchase and upgrade new equipment as appropriate. I mentioned earlier, one of the key things for us is magnetometers. And then we will, using our experience on past campaigns, figure out an intelligent way to go ahead and pre-position equipment across the country, whether that's vehicles, assets, technology, mobile alarms, what have you. Because the same challenge exists for the campaign, as I noted with the former president. We don't have the ability to rely on the Department of Defense to travel us for the campaign.
Yes, sir. Mr. Director, thank you for your answers. Madam Chair, I yield back to round 2.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Murray, thank you for being with us today. Yesterday, at least 19 children and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas were horrifically murdered at their school. This is another of the dozens of mass shootings that happen in this country every year because weapons of war are unconscionably easy to access. While we do not yet know this man's motives, there's mounting evidence between the link of mass violence and violence towards women. In March, I was both glad and a little surprised to see the Secret Service release an important publication titled Hot Yoga Tallahassee, a case study of misogynistic extremism. Glad because understanding the links between violence towards women and mass violence are critical to helping prevent both. And surprised because despite this importance, it's not something the federal government has really focused on before. I want to emphasize why learning more about this is so important, especially today. The Pulse nightclub massacre. 49 people were killed by a man who reportedly abused both his wives. The Sandy Hook school massacre. 26 people were killed by a man who first shot his mother and left writings calling women inherently selfish. The Boston Marathon bombing. 3 people were killed and 260 were injured by a man who had been arrested on domestic violence charges. The Virginia Tech massacre. 32 people were killed by a man with a history of stalking female classmates. The UC Santa Barbara attacks. 6 people were killed by a man who left behind a misogynistic manifesto and had attempted to assault women. The Colorado Planned Parenthood massacre. 3 people were killed by a man with a long history of assault and abuse who targeted a women's health clinic. The Sutherland Springs Church massacre. 26 people were killed by a man who had repeatedly beat and threatened to kill his ex-wives. The Atlanta Spa massacre. 8 people killed by a man who was motivated by violent, misogynist, and racist ideology. The 1966 University of Texas Austin shooting. 15 people were killed by a man who killed his wife and mother the night before. And even here at the 2015 congressional baseball shooting, where our colleague from Louisiana was shot, that gunman had reportedly abused his grandniece. And honestly, this is just a small portion of this list. It's not a coincidence that some of the most deadly, violent, and hateful mass shootings in our nation's history share a common thread of gender-based violence and misogyny. In fact, a study found that in 68% of mass shootings from 2014 to 2019, the gunman, because 98% of the time it is a man, had either killed an intimate partner or a family member, or he had a history of domestic violence. It's clear that broadly, gender-based violence is often a precursor to mass violence, yet it's not talked about or studied nearly often enough. The National Threat Assessment Center's case study is important because it centralizes this issue. The publication analyzes the gunman's personal history, including 3 arrests for groping women in public, being fired from multiple teaching positions for inappropriate behavior towards female students, years of assault and stalking female classmates, and writing disturbing songs and stories with misogynistic messages that romanticize mass killings. A friend's wife even contacted law enforcement about these threatening behaviors. And yet this man was still able to purchase a gun, plan a targeted attack, and commit mass violence. The report states hatred of women and the gender-based violence that it is associated with it requires increased attention from everyone with a role in public safety. Beyond this publication, can you share what the Secret Service is doing and can do to bring greater attention to gender-based violence specifically?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question, and thanks for your interest in that product and your support of the National Threat Assessment Center. So as you're aware, National Threat Assessment Center was something we started back in the 90s to support our own protective operations. After experiences like Columbine, President Clinton and members of Congress realized there might be an opportunity for the Secret Service to share really the science and math of what we do to help our communities, schools, businesses, cities and towns. And that's what we've endeavored to do for the last 20 plus years. It was a very deliberate decision, ma'am, to do that product you talked about with the Hot Yoga Tallahassee, because while there is no single profile for an attacker, there's also no single profile for the group that might be attacked. And some of the examples you gave as far as folks hurting people that were intimate or close to them is part of a constellation of behavior that our social science researchers have tried to share with communities and businesses to basically say it's not a matter of looking at demographically what an attacker might be, or even in terms of age or gender. However, it has to do with what the individual is saying or doing. And the ability there is to kind of assess that and then take action. One of the ways we do that, and the easier example I can use with regard to schools, is we identify these threat assessment teams. We recommend these threat assessment teams that get together and they act on these behaviors and they intervene. Candidly, though, this is not a solution that law enforcement in and of itself can accomplish. We're entirely reliant on the partnership in those instances in schools with administrators, town leaders. Today, we're actually not too far from your district, ma'am. We're in the 4th Ward of Chicago, delivering a presentation to faith leaders because another frequent target are houses of worship.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Murray, it's great to see you. And I want to congratulate you on the great job that the service does in coordinating and partnering with state and local law enforcement when you are out in the various communities. I really appreciate the partnership that you all have always shown. I want to follow up on my good friend Miss Underwood, her talking about the school violence at Uvalde. You know, in 2018, after the Parkland shooting, we passed my bill, the Stop School Violence Act of 2018. And the focus on that was 2 things. Number one, building partnerships between police, mental health, and the school administrators. But the other part was bringing CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, to the forefront. And I know NTAC has been very involved in that. In fact, I think y'all may have even helped develop that whole concept back in the 90s. And so my question is, as I talk to people in different school locations, I'm amazed how many people don't even know that the Stop School Violence Act has passed. This year, for example, in the president's budget request, we've got $135 million. $135 million. A lot of which could be used for CPTED at most of these schools that will keep these children safe. 82 million in the BJA grant process and another 53 million in the COPS Stop School Violence grant process. So we've got the money there. I'm afraid a lot of people know nothing about NTAC, the people that should. And so I'd like to ask, do you have plans, or can you plan to try and get this information out about the Stop School Violence Act and NTAC and some of those plans that are sitting on the shelf that have the potential of really stopping a lot of this school violence?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your question. The answer is yes, we do have plans. As I noted for the subcommittee earlier, last year alone, we conducted 135 different training sessions. We trained about 24,000 people. That's not to say anything about the high degree of consultation we do. The reality is, sir, we get far more requests than that than we can accommodate. And so, you know, with respect to our ability, I can tell you, as a dad, as an uncle, as the brother and brother-in-law of somebody who's 2 people have been a teacher for 30 years, it's hard not to be outraged and horrified by what happened yesterday. But the only thing that overshadows that, and I know I speak for everybody in the Secret Service, is our desire to want to help and make this better. Yeah. And we can. This is also true, though. With regard to these communities and these schools, it's not a lack of will. To your point, it's a lack of awareness. And if we had the ability, if we had the staffing and we had the support, we absolutely could get out there and reach a lot more people. And the results we have, I think somebody might be able to say, well, it's anecdotal, but we have actual examples where people have applied this model, this threat assessment model in their community. I'm thinking about one in particular from my home state of New Jersey, where the community was able to intervene and prevent an unwanted outcome. That's the term we use in our job here. We prevent an attack effectively. So hard to characterize any of those things as anecdotal when we're talking about saving lives.
And I've personally seen it work as well, even before we had the grant. So I thank you for that, Director. Very quickly, because I'm running out of time. I keep hearing on particularly on the years where we have presidential campaigns, that those officers who go over the limit on their overtime through no choice of their own, obviously, that even though they may not get paid in that fiscal year, I'm hearing that they pick it up in the next fiscal year. Now, and then other places I hear, no, they don't. So can you tell me, do they eventually get that money or not?
So not in all instances, sir. As I said, there's effectively two different pay caps we're talking about here. One is standard for all federal employees on the GS scale, and I'll use the GS scale for example.
Okay.
And then what happens there, and I'll use the example of agents. What happens there is the pay cap is here, and it moves up ever so slowly. But then when you have folks that are on a job for a number of years, and they're at a certain grade level, the president, whoever he or she is providing a 1, 2, or more % increase every year, and you erode that pay cap. So when somebody earns overtime, you effectively go over it. For many years, we did not have the ability to pay beyond that. Thanks to this subcommittee we have for the last number of years.
Okay.
But even beyond that, sir, there's another pay cap that we won't be able to go on. So to the example you used, if somebody works that much that they go over that second pay cap, they're not going to be compensated. And as happened to me growing up in this job, you quite literally get a pay statement that says, here's what we're paying you, here's where you over-earned and we're not paying you.
Yeah.
You get that every 2 weeks.
I see my time's run out, Madam Speaker, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield back. Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Mr. Rupesberger?
Not yet. Okay, you're good. Okay, thank you. Director Murray, first, thank you for your 30 years of service to your agency. It hasn't been 2 weeks and our country has been born witness to yet 3 more horrific mass shootings in public spaces. A church, grocery store, and yesterday an unspeakable attack inside a 4th grade classroom. As a grandfather of 5 grandchildren, I cannot imagine the pain these families are enduring right now. In America, going about your daily life is no longer a safe activity. The Secret Service has long loaned its expertise in threat assessment to public safety professionals across the country through its National Threat Assessment Center, or NTAC. First, can you tell me what actionable guidance has the Secret Service developed through NTAC's Safe Schools initiative to reduce the occurrence of mass shootings like we saw yesterday? And secondly, can you tell me how the president's budget will ensure the research and assessment conducted by NTAC continues to enhance a public safety and potentially prevent future acts of targeted violence?
Thank you, sir. So as I noted earlier, the prime way we deliver this training, and when I say this training, as I noted earlier, we actually share the science and math of how we conduct threat management for our own protective mission. That's something we've been doing for more than 20 years. And we do that by traveling out, meeting with communities, with school systems, with private sector partners, and we help them develop strategies. And those strategies are all about prevention. It's about having a plan so that when there's whether it's a student or an employee or somebody who attends a church or a synagogue, if somebody there starts exhibiting certain behaviors, because as I noted, there's no single profile, has nothing to do with age, gender, demographics, but when certain behaviors take place, that's a sign to engage in order to prevent these things from happening in the first place. One of the key ways we do that beyond that training is we offer consultation to these communities that would like us to do a deeper dive and to help them, in building their programs. We're very, very happy to do that. Answer to the second part of your question, sir. At present, this budget request is, with respect to NTAC, is around $4.5 million. We're grateful for that, but that will permit us to deliver about the same number of training events and reach out and touch about the same number of people in fiscal year 23.
Okay. All right, I yield back.
Ms. Henson.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Director Murray, for being here today. And I want to echo my colleagues in thanking you for your decades of service to our country. I certainly know that you have sacrificed a lot and appreciate all you and your staff do to sacrifice for our country and to serve and keep people safe. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about funding for fiscal year 23. I know that you do a lot to protect Iowans. We hear a lot about financial crimes and the work that you do to investigate those. I heard you reference in your opening comments, obviously, cybersecurity threats and the work that you're doing there. Of course, keeping our children safe and protective operations for many government officials. During my time in office, which hasn't been that long in DC, but I've seen a lot of instances where crimes under the Secret Service purview directly impact taxpayers in this country. COVID relief fraud and theft, cybersecurity threats against businesses and individuals that are being scammed, the weaponization of global financial sector, of course, during a time when we're seeing a lot of aggression across the world. All of these things impact safety and security for our families in Iowa. And so, of course, when we're going through all of these budget requests, we're trying to figure out how best to spend these taxpayer resources. I want to make sure we're being efficient as possible. And so you are, of course, in the Secret Service, not only charged with responsibly spending the money, but protecting, and then, of course, as I mentioned, fraud, reclaiming misused funds. So you mentioned that there have been more than 900 criminal investigations into fraud specific to pandemic-related relief funds over the past couple of years, which I believe totaled over $100 billion. So can you talk a little bit about the status of those criminal investigations? How many anticipated fraud cases are you still thinking are maybe out there? And just give us kind of a status report about where things are.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So as I shared the subcommittee last year, we knew going into spring of 2020, when we really couldn't define what COVID was going to mean to any of us, when we saw packages like the CARES Act come out, that while it was fantastic for our citizenry, we also knew it was a great opportunity for fraudsters. So we worked with our partners within DHS at CISA and at the FBI, and we were very much committed to making sure that people across all sectors were aware and that they remained alert, and they took a belt and braces approach to readying for what was coming at them in terms of fraud. And candidly, we were not concerned about making good cases back then. We just wanted to make sure we could knock down schemes as we encountered them. Over time, as you noted, we did start to open up cases, and we have opened up well more than 900 at this point. We've arrested about the same number of people, and we've seized a lot of money. But more importantly, as I noted in my opening remarks, we've been able to sort of stop the loss of and return money to potential victims. And that's an even bigger win for us in the Secret Service.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you talk about returning that money. What are you doing to mitigate similar scenarios like this from happening in the future? Because obviously we know that the fraudsters follow any time they can try to find an opportunity to take advantage of something. The pandemic fraud recovery efforts are just one example of that. But what are you thinking about the future, right? Because there's no guarantee that this kind of a situation isn't going to happen again.
You're absolutely right, ma'am. And I think I may have used the example that 6 years after Hurricane Katrina, I was in a small office, New Jersey, and we opened up 2 Hurricane Katrina fraud cases, 1,000 miles away, 6 years later. Mm-hmm. So to your earlier question, we're still opening up about 2 or 3 COVID fraud cases per month now. That's significantly down for the last 2 years, but that's been a pretty steady drip. We expect that to go on for a period of time, and we'll be combating COVID fraud for a number of years. That's a fact. We know that. The way that we basically make sure that we get the word out there about whether it's COVID fraud or any other sort of fraud is through our network of cyber fraud task forces. We have 42 across the country, 2 overseas. On those are obviously Secret Service personnel, but more importantly, federal, state, local law enforcement, academia, and anybody in the public sector, private sector that wants to join. It's basically an information sharing a network. And so that's how we kind of make sure that people get out there, and not to oversimplify it, but sometimes to use a clunky analogy, it's as simple as telling people to lock the doors in your cars out in front of your house so your car doesn't get broken into.
Right, the cyber hygiene aspect, which I think is the
Absolutely.
word you used last year. And
Yes.
I've used that analogy with many of my private sector businesses that I've visited as well. And I think flagging that for them has been incredibly critical. And so you are working directly with CIS on that, I know. We had, the director before us a few weeks ago as well, kind of lamenting that, hey, they have all these resources available. We want to make sure we get the word out. So I'll follow up with some other questions in round 2, but just want to really appreciate my gratitude for all you do to help spread awareness about this. So thank you very much, Director.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director, thanks for your service and thanks for being with us today. A couple of my colleagues have referenced NTAC. I guess to the extent possible, could you go a little bit deeper dive the increase in variety and intensity of social media and postings, I guess provides opportunities and challenges for you as you do assessments and you find out what's going on. I mean, what are the tools and what are the possibilities of how you gather information? As you're assessing a situation or moving into an area, to what extent are you able to use social media and postings you see and information that comes through you through social media and those other outlets?
Yes, sir. If I may, I'll answer that in 2 ways. So we certainly have invested a lot with regard to open source assessment when it comes to the Secret Service's protective mission. The Secret Service I grew up in, a garden variety threat case was something where somebody walks into a diner, they sit down at the counter, they start mouthing off. They eventually say something that sounds a lot like a threat because of one of the other patrons. They call local law enforcement, who calls the Secret Service, and we respond out and we open up a threat case. While those things still happen, the reality is those types of threats are just lying dormant out there on the internet right now. And we can't rely on good citizens only to bring those to our attention. We have to go out there and find them. And it is very much like finding a needle inside a mountain full of needles. And one challenge, one thing that's paramount for us is the First Amendment. So you have to be mindful of what's your freedom of speech, what's First Amendment speech, and what is closer to threatening language. We have invested a lot into an open source branch we have within our Protective Intelligence Division. We leverage publicly available tools. We do some R&D of our own, and we use some tools available from our partners. That's how we handle it for protective operation. When we're providing consultation, when it comes to NTAC, we're not actively involved in the investigation. But to your point, if folks are spending time online or they're engaging in activity online that's noticeable to others, that fits within that constellation of behavior that I mentioned earlier, that's one of those concerning behaviors, or another way to put that, another warning sign where we'd want some level of intervention, or we'd recommend some level of intervention from that threat assessment team, which is made up of, in the case of a student, it'd be the school, the community, and to a certain extent, law enforcement.
Yeah, but you talk about a needle among needles. First, you've got this multitude of postings. It must take a tremendous amount of resources to not just review those, but to have the experts assess, just as you say, what constitutes a threat. Not putting aside the First Amendment, but it must be the language that's used must be part of a larger context, that you have some sort of prescribed limits that, okay, this isn't. It seems to be pretty subjective at some point.
Subjective maybe, but I'll say this, it's a full-time operation. It's 24/7, 365. Our folks are culling through a lot of different information. We're, as always, in everything we do, we're highly reliant on the partnerships we have with other law enforcement, public safety informations. And there's a whole lot of information sharing that goes on there, because candidly, we're engaged in this effort in the same way that the U.S. Capitol Police is engaged in this effort in order to protect the Capitol and members of Congress.
Yeah, but when it happens in the Capitol, I mean, let's say someone posts something that's in that gray area, or, goes beyond, there are limits to what they can do in terms of resources. Do they approach this person? Who approaches them? And the question is, how do you have those kind of resources to further investigate this, to let this person know that they've gone too far, or at least to monitor them while the person you're protecting is in their area?
Sir, it's notable. We conduct about more than 6,000 protective intelligence or threat management cases every year.
Tore that in, and you do it yourself? You don't use local law enforcement?
We do it ourselves. We do it in concert with our partners at the FBI through our Joint Terrorism Task Force. We absolutely work with local and state law enforcement in all things that we do.
Very
But if
good.
it's something that's, if there's a threat directed against a Secret Service protectee, then the Secret Service will effectively lead that investigation or will work jointly with the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Very good. Thanks for your information. I yield back.
Mr. Palazzo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Murray, thank you for being on today to answer our questions. And also thank you for your service in the United States Army Reserves. I appreciate you for doing that. One thing that's been evident to this committee is that many federal agencies are sending support to our southwestern border to help deal with the surge of people trying to get into our nation. Could you tell me, is the Secret Service providing any of that support to the southwestern border mission?
We are, sir, particularly in terms of leadership. We've had a number of our folks go down at the senior executive service level and folks that are in training, if you will, to achieve that level, to go down there and run certain programs and assist. We have had a number of folks for our workforce to go down there and support it as well, but candidly, not at the same numbers of other components within DHS. I think the simplest answer to that is because, as I noted earlier, we are a workforce that's has very heavy protective operations. We're already having to cancel days off for people that are supporting the Secret Service mission. So it's not conceivable, and there's probably not a whole lot of interest for folks who are traveling the world for protection to come home and then raise their hand to go down, whether it's the southwest border or anywhere else. But this is something we've been committed to. We continually make our workforce know that there's opportunity to do so. And as I noted, we've taken a notable leadership role down there in some of the programs that are ongoing.
With as much as you can, have y'all seen an increase or any activity of where transnational financial criminals are trying to come across or take advantage of this huge surge of people at the southern border? Are y'all in the position to discuss that or report any apprehensions?
We have not seen any trend to that regard as yet, sir.
Okay, well, thank you. And listen, thank you for your service. And, we really appreciate you and your entire workforce for what you do. I know it's a lot of work being thrown on your shoulders right now.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Aguilar?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director, you talked a little bit in response to a few of my colleagues' questions about the National Threat Assessment Center. And I wanted to come back to that. Obviously, our frustration and heartache related to yesterday's school shooting, but I want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to direct our federal resources and to protect students and prevent these types of shootings from happening in the future. Can you tell us specifically the work that you're doing, working in schools, training schools and school leaders, school officials, how you're ensuring that this training protects the mental health needs of children and minimizes the discriminatory practices?
Yes, sir. Thank you. As I noted earlier, I think the one thing we're very clear about when we go out and we engage with our partners out there in the communities and schools is that they don't fall into the trap that there's one certain type of profile with regard to potential attackers. It has much more to do with the behaviors or the constellation of behaviors, as I noted earlier. The idea of engaging with, we'll use the example of schools, is for them to go ahead and develop their own threat assessment plan within the school that's comprised of a multidisciplinary team of educators, counselors, mental health professionals, yes, law enforcement, but this is not a law enforcement led or law enforcement run effort in any way, shape, or form. The idea is that if there are instances where there are these concerning behaviors, to not only intervene, but intercede on behalf of that individual to get that person help. And if I may, I mentioned to one of the other gentlemen earlier, we conduct about 6,000 threat assessment cases a year in the Secret Service for for our protective mission. We don't arrest a whole lot of people when it comes to threat management. We do get a lot of those people that come to our attention in for counseling and for mental health assistance. That's something we've done for a lot of decades. So we've looked to capitalize on that experience, and that certainly informs how it is we not only deliver the training when it comes to NTAC, but also provide consultation at the school and at the community level.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Obviously something top of mind for all of us. Switching gears, Director, I wanted to talk about the focus the agency has on combating cyber crimes related to cryptocurrencies. We've talked about this in the past, and I know since 2015, the Secret Service has seized over 100 million in crypto used in money laundering, ransomware, and other illicit activities. Can you talk with us about how this budget request impacts your ransomware investigations and how the illicit use of digital assets challenges your investigators, and give us some examples of successes that you've had?
Yes, sir. And greatly appreciative of the subcommittee's continuing support of the Secret Service's investigative mission mandate. So we're very proud of being the nation's first financial crimes investigators going back to 1865. We've been involved in this game since went from paper to plastic to bits and bytes. And now a lot of the work we do is literally in the clouds. And when it comes to crypto, it's just it's been a new challenge. I do think, sir, there's a misapprehension, if you will, out there that cryptocurrency in and of itself is illicit or inherently not good. That's not the case. I use the example of the interstate system. We all use the interstate system to get where we want to go see loved ones. We don't know who's traveling past us on those highways. Are they trafficking in guns, people, drugs? Don't know, but we don't indict the interstate system. And I think there's a misapprehension when people indict cryptocurrency in and of itself. There are two very unique challenges with cryptocurrency that we encounter. The first one is the anonymity that's involved, that you can send and receive cryptocurrency without identifying yourself. And the other one is the use of what we'll call over-the-counter exchanges, so not bona fide exchange companies. We have worked very hard in studying the blockchains and how the blockchain system works. We've had a lot of success in defeating that anonymity, and especially when it comes to the on-ramps and the off-ramps of that money transferring. And that's where we've been able to yield a lot of those seizures that you're talking about. There's one particular case I would note, it's called Operation Tourniquet, where for the past year or so, we've been working on focusing on a digital marketplace out of the UK, where individuals were trading information and then converting that to cryptocurrency. We were able to arrest the administrator of that, but also perform an undercover role for a number of weeks and identify other illicit activity that went on. We were able to identify 700 million users of that digital marketplace, and we were able to identify 110 billion different unique records that were potentially going to be used in fraud.
Appreciate that answer. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
That completes round one, and we will now begin round two. Director Murray, I'd like to follow up on the training and training infrastructure. One of the issues noted by the Protective Mission Panel several years ago was the lack of a facility for training agents and officers assigned to the White House. While we funded a feasibility study several years ago, 3 administrations have yet to actually request funding for that facility. Can you talk about the importance of a White House training facility?
Yes, ma'am. And thank you for the question, and thank you for your support of being able to update that feasibility study, which is going on right now. So I believe last year when I met with the subcommittee, we discussed that this White House training facility is absolutely critical to the Secret Service. And the analogy I may have used was, if you think of the Secret Service like a basketball team, we're a basketball team without a court, without baskets, or without a basketball. And we have nowhere to practice when it comes to the White House facility. There's nothing at our training facility that replicates the White House or the White House complex itself. this would be a game changer for us, because what it would do is it would afford us the ability to not only train our officers and our agents, but provide real-time, real-life training environment where we could also work with our White House military office partners, and then our National Capital Region partners like the U.S. Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police Department, and the DC Fire Department. We expect to get the results of this study in the fall of this year, and look forward to advocating for support for the fiscal year 24 budget.
Do you have any updated cost estimates at this time?
So nothing definitive, ma'am. When you supported the original feasibility study a number of years ago, it was somewhere around $90 million. We suspect it'll be closer to 140 million when we get the results in the fall.
Okay. And what is it that this subcommittee can do to help move the project forward? For example, is there a useful next step that you are ready to take that we could support?
Yes, ma'am. The one thing we can move out very quickly on is with regard to things like permitting. We can cover down on 100% of the design cost, and we can actually start beginning the clearing of land at our training facility here in the National Capital Region.
We'll definitely take a look at that.
Thank you.
It's always challenging for an agency to budget for a fiscal year in advance. It's even harder to do when you can't predict what your requirements are going to be from year to year. And for the Secret Service, that unknown requirement is often the total number of individuals that you'll need to protect. Based on the obligations that you now have, do you foresee any budget problems as we move further into this fiscal year and into FY23?
So, as you noted, ma'am, it's impossible to start out the year to know how many protective visits or operations we're going to have to carry out. And as I've already stated for the subcommittee, we've exceeded what our assumptions were. While I can't say for sure that we have any budget problems, this is an ongoing effort where we stay in constant communication with DHS, OMB, and we're grateful for the counsel we received from senior staff in the subcommittee. As we move forward into the summer, I think we'll have a better idea as to whether there'll be a shortfall in funding or not.
And how do you balance the need to fully fund protection requirements with the need to also fund investigations? And is your budget balanced correctly between funding for protection and investigations?
We feel it is balanced correctly, but candidly here in the Secret Service, we're very proud to be charged with this mission mandate of both protection and investigation. But the reality is it's not a 50-50 split. You know, there's two dragons, and that protection dragon is going to eat first. And so we tend to always make protection our priority here in the Secret Service.
And we've seen a significant increase, as has been noted, in data breaches in all sectors, including the financial sector. And just this past year, what is the role of the Cyber Fraud Task Force in mitigating and investigating cyber crimes related to network intrusions in the financial sector?
Yes, ma'am. So our network of cyber fraud task forces, which we have 44 around the world, they are the ones who lead our investigations out there in the field. They do so in partnership with federal, state, and local partners, many of whom we actually train down at the National Computer Forensics Institute in Alabama. We equip them as well. And they are the ones that are going out there and responding to, as I believe I noted earlier, we respond to about 2 network intrusions per day here in the Secret Service.
Mr. Fleischman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Director, this next line of questioning is more of a matter of inquiry, deals with the issue of the fully armored vehicles, sir. The fully armored vehicle program contracted with O'Gara Armoring Company to design and install armor and other equipment in the chassis of vehicles. Unfortunately, early this year, O'Gara announced it was going out of business and unable to continue contracted work. Now the Secret Service is working to transfer this production line to a new vendor. Sir, for the benefit of the committee, what is the status of the fully armored vehicle program, and what impacts from either cost or schedule is this situation having on the program?
Thank you, sir. As you'll recall, a number of years ago, back in 2018, 2019, we actually made a wholesale purchase of a number of vehicles that we would armor in support of our fully armored vehicle fleet. That was because General Motors was ceasing production of a particular model, a 3500 model line. At that time, we developed a plan to armor about 100 vehicles per year in order to upgrade and replenish our fleet going back to somewhere in the area of the 2010s. As you noted, there's a firm we were contracted with who decided to cease business operations recently. That caused us to go out there and reclaim some of our vehicles, some of them in parts. We were able to establish contracts with other armoring companies. We are on a path to achieve the armoring rate that we set out for to begin with. A little bit of hustle involved there. The one thing that we probably won't be able to invest in the upcoming fiscal year is studies and designs with regard to the next gen FAV, which was something we're always mindful of.
Yes, sir. A little bit of a follow-up. What is the impact of switching contractors and the overall cost of the program? And will the Secret Service require additional funds to support the completion of the fully armored vehicle program that you just alluded to currently?
Yes, sir. There's no notable change with regard to the cost in terms of the armoring plan itself. We don't think we need funding for that specific purpose at this time.
Okay. And you feel personally comfortable, sir, where the program is now, given all of the circumstances that have occurred, and able to move forward?
I do, sir. Yes.
Excellent.
I don't think this will affect mission readiness in a negative way.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your questions today, your outstanding service, and my best to the men and women of the Secret Service. Thank you so much. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, I wanted to continue with my questions about the Hot Yoga Tallahassee report. I really appreciate the Secret Service's attention to this issue, and I think it's something that other federal law enforcement agencies should be focused on as well. So what are your next steps after this report? Are you working with other agencies like the FBI to share its findings and learn more about this issue?
So, NTAC itself, ma'am, is not working directly with the FBI. As I said, it was certainly a deliberate decision to focus on that event that happened in Tallahassee because we thought it was certainly a worthwhile examination. We are always looking for our next project that we're going to be addressing. I don't know what that subject matter is right now. However, we welcome the opportunity to work with groups within the community, to engage with them when it comes to consultation and training and help them best prepare in establishing their own threat assessment teams.
How does Secret Service use behavioral threat assessments like the one used in this report to intervene before acts of mass violence?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I think you cut out there. The what now?
I said, how does Secret Service use behavioral threat assessments like the one used in this report to intervene before acts of mass violence occur?
I'm not familiar. Is that something that's in I'm not familiar with that model.
The behavioral threat assessment model.
Behavioral.
Yes.
So in this instance, with regard to the yoga situation, you're not talking about a school, you're not talking about a place of business where the person worked. So that would be a broader community issue where, as you noted, the actor in that case was somebody who'd been identified as exhibiting all these behaviors that we talked about. That would require something where, in this case, Tallahassee would have to develop their own community-based threat assessment team.
Right, but if you all were doing this kind of analysis and you all discovered some information, how does Secret Service use it? That's my question.
So we would use this obviously in the delivery of other training to other groups, regardless of motivation. For us, as I noted, when we started the National Threat Assessment Center back in the 90s, it was on the heels of an effort we had called the Exceptional Case Study. And what that was we looked at a number of cases that were not organically Secret Service cases, where they weren't directed at Secret Service protectees. One example would be the Son of Sam case. And we looked to see what happened in those instances, what were the early warning signs, what were the points where intervention or intercession could have taken place, and what might we learn to kind of strengthen our own protective mission. We effectively look to do the same thing when we share this with other communities. And as I noted, I think whether we're talking with faith-based groups, schools, business communities, we look to have that inform our consultation.
Okay, so you're saying that the behavioral analysis is not done like prospectively for your protectees with respect to the threats that you're encountering?
Well, it could be. I'll give you an example. Okay. If a community or a school came to us and said, hey, we think we're having a problem, we have a concern about this student or this individual, absolutely NTAC would make itself available to come out there and provide consultation and help make an assessment of that situation.
Okay, and then is gender-based violence, like intimate partner violence and violent misogyny, an identifier that the Secret Service uses or is considering using when assessing national threats?
So when we go out and we conduct our protective intelligence cases, or we conduct a threat assessment, if you will, we absolutely look at those types of things. We look at whether or not there's violence within the home, whether there's violence that's being committed against the person who is accused of being an attacker or could have been the attacker. We look at whether or not there's violence against animals. We look at whether or not somebody has access to weapons, and so on and so forth. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a constellation of behaviors we're looking to get a sense of, not just one person on one day or one emotional outburst, if you will.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Murray, I want to talk a little bit very quickly about your staffing, recruitment, and retention. To get to those 200 new positions that you mentioned earlier, that will get you around the 8,300 mark of personnel. You talk about the need to actually onboard 962 people to get to that number. That's 200 plus your attrition of about 762. Now, what concerns me going forward is when your onboarding takes roughly 8 months, 238 days, we're coming up on that mark for November 2023. I know when you guys, I know it's a 120-day window, but you really do start a year out. So November 23 is really your start date, as you mentioned earlier. Two things that concern me. Number one, are we going to be able to hit that mark? And I'll just ask you that. Do you think we're going to be able to hit that mark okay?
Well, sir, you mean the mark of 8,305 or the larger one of just under 10,000?
No, the 8,300 that will get you the 200 new positions this year.
Yes.
And the 996 going into next year.
Yes, sir. We're confident we're going to hit the 8,305 for sure.
Okay.
Baked into our human capital strategic plan is this intent to hire actually around 300 per year. And that accounts for that attrition number, which is, if you roll up all the law enforcement positions, about 9% for us. That's why you have that larger higher number.
Okay, and so let me bring this issue up too, because if there's one thing that I consistently hear about the service, it's some grumbling about the GS 14, 15 areas, that you could have better middle management. Let me ask you this, because I would love to sit down and talk to you. I know right now they use a straight written technical exam for the promotion process, if what I'm hearing is correct. I can tell you the agencies that I've dealt with, that law enforcement agencies that have used the assessment center model, and I'm sure you've heard about it. I know it's expensive. I know it's time consuming, but I have to tell you, it will cut down on your attrition numbers significantly, I believe. And so that's one thing that I'd like to talk to you about offline, but also this overtime pay. We've got to fix that. We can do that. I'd love to sit down with you and talk about that, what we need to do to accomplish that. And then third and finally, I think, I don't know if there's some way you can get a commitment. I know we lose an awful large number of the attrition as people leaving, going to the FBI, going to HSI, and we ought to be able to find a way to slow that down. Maybe you get a 4-year commitment if they're going through your academy, a 4 or 5 year commitment, something that will hold these people over the hump, so that once they get that much time on, they will stay with the service. Would you be willing to sit down and talk about those things? Because I think we can help reduce those attrition numbers.
Sir, I appreciate the offer. I'd very much welcome the opportunity to sit down and talk with you about it, kind of share our experiences. The one thing I will tell you is that been here in the Secret Service 27 years, wouldn't want it any other way, but would also tell you there's no more demanding job in the federal government than being in the Secret Service, regardless of job description, agent, officer, mission support. When we get to 10,000 people, that'll still be true, but we're always looking for innovative ways to convince people that they're in the right place. We even look at, might there be a unique way to tailor our retirement system to, incentivize people to stay on
the
board?
others. I agree. Last question very quickly. With the roughly 15 million, I think that's in this year's budget for the FAV hardening, can you tell me what percentage of the 532 or 36 vehicles that will accomplish? Is that for 100% hardening of the fleet?
Yes, sir. That's for the 100% of the number we're going to do this year. But with your permission, when I come and visit you about other things, I'll have a hard and fast answer for you then. I don't have that right in front of me right now.
Madam Chair, I see my time has run out. I yield back. Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Mr. Rupesberger?
Where for many years.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. For many years, the Secret Service has been funding and staffing the National Computer Forensics Institute to help train state and local law enforcement personnel, prosecutors, and judges to better understand computer and digital evidence and cyber crime methods. In my district, the 2019 Robin Hood attack caught Baltimore City off guard when ransomware froze the city's IT systems. All servers, with the exception of essential services, were taken offline. In a ransom note, hackers demanded a 13 Bitcoin, roughly $76,280, in exchange for keys to restore access. It was found that the perpetrators were able to exploit aging hardware and unpatched software. Ultimately, it took the city several weeks to restore and rebuild its servers and several months to fully recover from the attack. The city spent $4.2 million on recovery efforts in the first 3 weeks after the attack alone. To that end, could you describe the level of Secret Service engagement in this program and the benefits that the training has had in complementing the Secret Service's mission? What impact does Ncfi training have on investigations carried out by your cyber fraud task forces and local law enforcement?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So as you noted, Ncfi opened its doors back in 2008. Back then, for that year, I think we trained somewhere in the area of 250 of our law enforcement partners. And I want to say we offered 3 or 4 different courses. Last year, we trained nearly 4,000 people and we offer 30 different distinct courses. What's more is we equip all those folks that come in. And again, those are local, state, territorial, and tribal law enforcement, prosecutors, and judges. And while it's a selfless endeavor and a way for us to give back for all the support we get in the protective side of the house, the truth is that we're so glad that so many of them stay on and participate in our cyber fraud task forces. But the real impact is in the fact that these folks go back and they do this sort of work to support their own communities. And what they're doing there is they are not only looking at things like ransomware, sir, they are doing all the cyber examination and exploitation when it comes to violent crimes, homicides, crimes against children, and the list goes on and on and on. We're very, very proud of the work that our graduates do. And as I said, happy to have them be part of the Cyber Fraud Task Force and contribute to the Secret Service mission. But I think the real contribution is what they're able to get back to their own communities.
Thank you. Back. Okay.
I believe there are no more questions, so we will conclude today's hearing. Thank you very, very much, Director Murray, for the time, especially for your service and that of all the Secret Service, everything that you do for your country. I think that you've heard from this subcommittee how much it is truly appreciated. And with that, the Subcommittee on Homeland Security is adjourned.